Hello everyone, this will be the first video in a continuing series where I overview different units available in the Age of Sigmar. What I hope to achieve is to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and appreciation of the unit I explore. I'm going to explore units I've used or played against multiple times in my games so I can give you an experienced analysis of said unit. So with that said, let's jump into it with our first unit, the Warriors of Chaos. The Warriors of Chaos are your rank and file mortal champions. In previous incarnations of Warhammer, they were meant to be the core of your army, though that intent has not always reflected itself on the board. Chaos factions have always had a smorgasbord of delicious choices that made many players want to minimize the inclusion of warriors in their armies, and this became completely avoidable as a practice in many 8th edition armies thanks to Chaos Chariots being introduced as core units. Now with the Age of Sigmar, Warriors of Chaos have been given an important boost in stats that many units in the transition over did not receive, which is becoming 2 wound models. This allows a unit of warriors to maintain the same offensive output in a smaller footprint, which is incredibly important since weapon ranges hold back an equally offensive but much larger unit of 1 wound models. This, I believe, is the definition of durability in Age of Sigmar, and I hope this translates into seeing more warriors on the board, as they've always been the face of the army, I believe. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the different weapon options available to the Warriors of Chaos in Age of Sigmar. So Chaos Warriors come with 4 weapon options. The first is hand weapon and shield, then we have 2 hand weapons, then halberd and shield, and finally the Great Blade. Now, no matter the option you choose, you will only ever have 2 attacks, so the amount of attacks is the same throughout. A quick overview will reveal that the 2 hand weapon option allows for the most possible amount of hits, since it lets you reroll ones to hit. This is a minor but effective boon. You can trade this minor offensive buff for a minor defensive one in the form of Sword and Board. Instead of rerolls, you get a 1 in 3 chance to ignore any mortal wounds inflicted on the unit. Again, not a factor that would be game deciding, but it gives you some level of protection from the many things out there that inflict mortal wounds. The next option is Halberd and Shield, which is similar to Sword and Shield except that you trade hitting on a 3+ for hitting on a 4+ and getting an extra inch of reach. In this option, the trade-off is not as clear as the other 3, so let's take a moment to discuss this. I think this facet of the game falls short in design, as the potential that is there becomes utterly lacking when you consider bases do not matter. I say this because players can easily model their bases to allow 1-ish model units to get their full complement of attacks, making the choice between these units quite moot. If bases mattered in the sense that base size was made uniform on all units, then there would be a real distinction between a 2-inch threat unit and a 1-inch one. However, there is another factor, even if this was implemented, that makes this unnecessarily complicated, and that is in the choice of base shape and size that GW uses for its products. Not only are bases circular, which is inherently trickier to measure than a simple square, though I will agree that circular bases look much better, but the sizes are measured in the metric while the game is played in inches, making the option incredibly awkward even if it was held as the standard. If bases were supplied in a form that were complementary with inches, or more optimally if the game was played in the metric system, it would make this part of the game less murky, particularly if the game was played on squares. As it stands, if I play my models being measured from the base, it would seem, superficially of course, that models with a 1-inch threat range would only be able to attack models in base-to-base contact. However, if the models are positioned like you see in this picture, in this particular way, then it can include additional models. Unfortunately, the game doesn't develop its combats in such a neat pattern, making distinguishing these a bit tedious. If combat was simply defined as bases, then I think different threat ranges would be a larger factor, such as having a base-to-base threat range, or having a 1 or 2 over threat range. However, bringing this discussion back to the unit at hand, it would seem to me that you would only want to consider halberds if you are interested in bringing a particularly large unit of warriors of say 20+, thereby guaranteeing more attacks from the unit that would otherwise be wasted by a hand weapon wielding unit. Likewise, a smaller unit that would have all its models engaged at all times sacrifices a +1 to hit for no conceivable gain. So moving on though, Finally, we have the Great Blades, where the trade-off is a bit better measured. Wielding these weapons causes your unit to lose out on a possible hit because they hit on 4s rather than on 3s, but in exchange they get a +1 to wound and a rend characteristic, which is incredibly valuable against those character units and 4+ units with Mystic Shield casted on them. So a final summary shows that the two-hand weapon warriors maximize offense. A handed shield gives your unit added durability from the many forms of attacks that inflict mortal wounds. The halberd and shield are for your very large units. Great weapons are best against high armored units. Other options for warriors include the standard bearer, which gives you a +1 bravery. I think that's very important. A musician, which gives you +1 to your run and charge. Note that this does not increase your charge range at 13. You still have to be within 12 inches to declare a charge, so you can't declare a charge at 13. And then the aspiring champion, whose attacks hit on a +1. Note there's not an extra attack. There's also the Legion of Chaos rule, which allows you to reroll saves of 1 if you're over 20. I think this solidifies the halberds as your best defensive unit to hold an important position. You can also give your units a keyword matching the god you want them dedicated to. While this initially doesn't do anything for them inherently, it gives them some synergy with other units. From the old generation line, this includes models with the command abilities that share those keywords, the Chaos War Shrine, and the battle scroll called Chaos Warband, which gives your unit a boon for the rest of the game after they kill a unit. For Slaanesh, it allows that unit not to take battle shock tests. For Nurgle, it's rerolling all failed save rolls. For Khorne, it's rerolling all failed to hit rolls, and for Tzeentch, it allows that unit to start casting Arcane Bolt. I don't think that this is a particularly great formation compared to some of those new ones that are coming out, but it is a little something if you decide to run with a theme. As for models that are dedicated to particular gods, I think it's going to become more available in the future, and that there's going to be a clear interaction that will become more common. However, I do believe that the future of these vanilla Chaos Warriors is tenuous, as I see GW releasing specific themed warriors for all the gods, as Khorne has the Wrathmongers, Skull Reapers, and Blood Warriors, and Nurgle has the Blight Kings. I do think we'll see both Tzeentch and Slaanesh getting their own versions of specialty warriors. I see this as the future of the Mortal Chaos armies, and I think the generic warriors are just bridging the gap between these editions, and I would not be surprised that when a Age of Sigmar Part 2 comes out eventually, probably won't see the regular Chaos Warriors as much, if at all. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. This will conclude the first episode of Close-Ups. Please leave me some feedback, and thank you for watching.